Here I am knitting a circular gauge swatch. For circular knitting, the right side of the work is always facing you. There's no stopping and turning back and purling it with circular knitting. So purling gives a different gauge for most knitters than knitting. So I can't use a regular flat knit gauge swatch for a circular project. So here I'm working on a little swatch of knitting that is appropriate for circular knitting. I'm just knitting across, and I'll show you what these little loops on the back are all about in a second. I'm knitting across, and when I get to the end, instead of stopping and purling my way back, I'm going to slide the knitting to the other side of my needle. But you know, oh, where's the yarn? I need to grab it from the other side. And leaving a nice generous loop, generous enough so that I can lay this gauge swatch flat and the loop doesn't pull it in at all, so I can take an accurate reading. These actually might be a little on the tight side in a few of these loops. I can always cut them, I guess, if it doesn't lay flat. So I'm just leaving a nice loop in the back and knitting again. All right, and one little trick some people like to do, instead of leaving the short loop as I've done here, you can take a nice long loop. I'm going to do a measure up to my elbow and plus a few more inches, and make a huge loop and leave that dangling, and I'll show you what you can do with this. This is optional. So I'm going to knit with my working yarn, as usual, for a gauge swatch. And when I get to the end, so now I slide to the other side of the needle, as I would for the short loop method, for having these short loops. But with the long loop, if I want to do this, what I can do is now take this long loop and use it to knit with, and then knit it up, and in the end I will have used up most of it, might have a few inches left, and I'll have a pretty sloppy left hand of my swatch, but I won't have any dangling loops in the back, and I like not having anything dangling in the back for a swatch. Also, by using up the tail yarn, instead of, for instance, cutting the knitting and opening it out, you can then unravel the swatch without having the breaks in the yarn that cutting would give you. So if you run out of yarn in your project, you can always get it from your swatch. Now, there's other methods of taking gauge for your circular project. You don't necessarily have to do this swatch, and other methods might be to knit a hat in your yarn. If you have enough yarn to do a little project, you can do something like a hat. Just, you know, take your best guess as to needle size, cast on your best guess as to how many cast on stitches for a hat, and go ahead and knit it, and then it's bound to fit somebody. A large hat would be an adult, large, about 23-inch circumference. Or a real small hat would be a 15-inch preemie size. So aim for somewhere in the middle, and if your gauge is a little loose, it'll fit a larger size, and if it's a little tight, it'll fit a baby. So, you know, aim for 18 to 19 inches and you'll be in good shape. Another good trick for a gauge swatch is to knit a sweater, like a top-down sweater, and start at the neckline. If you start at the neckline and work your way out, it's okay if it's a little bit loose. You just change your needle size. You'll have a little bit of a loose neckline or a little bit tight, but you change one needle size and you won't even be able to tell in the knitting, and that is a great way to go. Another trick is to start at a sleeve. And this is actually pretty common. A lot of knitters do this. If you have a pretty good guess as to your needle size, you just cast on for the cuff and knit your way up. And because it's such a small circumference on around the wrist, if it's a little loose or a little tight, that's fine. And usually, the arm is going to grow and change in size as you progress up the arm anyway. So changing needle size isn't going to be noticed there for sure. And at least, especially one needle size, if you're talking a few needle sizes, you might want to start over. But yeah, these are great places to start knitting a sweater in any case, and whether or not you've done it at Swatch, and then just double check your gauge as you go. It's always a good idea, and you can confidently knit the body of your sweater. So you have done a gauge swatch or cast on your sleeve or neck, and done some knitting and checked your gauge and adjusted as needed. And certainly by the time you've done your sleeve, you will have some good practice in, and you can confirm that that you've got the gauge you want to have, and then work on the body of the sweater. The body of the sweater has so many stitches on it that here's where you want to really be sure of your gauge before you work this area. If you're off by half a stitch per inch, it can mean 4 inches easily in a change in size in your garment. So save that for when you're nice and warmed up and you're certain of your gauge, and you will be in great shape.